There you go.
There we go.
Yeah, that's a good smile, see? And you're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Brad Lipps. He is the CEO of the Atlas Economic Research Foundation. You know, it sounds like something that you may not want to watch and learn about, but when you think about a person who's the head of a $9 million organization, about, 20 or 30 people, and he's working in 80 countries to bring the notion of free markets to the people in those countries so they can affect change, affect the government. Basically, it's a liberty organization. It's an organization that follows people like Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek, who is one of the Austrian economists, right? Milton Friedman was probably, I would say, the most prominent economist in the United States of the 20th century. Adam Smith in the 18th century, Alfred Marshall in the 19th century, and then Milton Friedman in the 20th century. All people who understood the essence of free markets. And that's what you're doing here. You're going around the world, and it's as if you were a missionary.
Right.
And you're bringing the gospel of Adam Smith and Alfred Marshall and Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek.
That's a good way to sum it up.
You might say just the last two, but I think I'd want to throw in Adam Smith. And you know Alfred Marshall?
Yes.
Basically, these are people who are just solid price theorists, solid economists. I guess Friedrich von Hayek, you might say, is more of a philosopher. Would that be true?
He worked in a number of different disciplines, but economics is where he won his Nobel Prize. So
you tell me, Brad, what is the essence of what you do? When you go home and you go to sleep and you hit the pillow, what's a successful day for you?
Well, I think you've described our work very well. We kind of operate like a Johnny Appleseed of free market think tanks. So we begin with the philosophy and this basic intuition that we have that people are better off when they're free to make their own decisions and when they're less vulnerable to government interference in their lives. And we think that think tanks that work outside of government but are trying to influence politicians to make decisions that are respectful of individual liberty, we think that those types of organizations can play a big role. So our work at Atlas is really geared towards strengthening a worldwide network. It's rather strong now in the US, so now a lot of our work is international, so that there are these civil society organizations out there that are trying to point politicians in the right direction. Because we believe that you can't just count on electing the best people to office. We really have to make sure that, I think this is actually a Milton Friedman quote, that we have to make it attractive, politically profitable for even bad people to make good policy decisions. So when the incentives, because of public opinion, direct them to be in favor of free markets, limited government, smaller.
But Friedman was of the view, you may have followed this debate or dialogue, but at the University of Chicago, and he was there for a good part of his adult life, but not all of it. He left actually in the mid-'70s and passed away, about 30 years later?
2006, yeah.
And he left about 76, so 30 years later. He spent a lot of time at the Hoover Institution out at Stanford in those 20 or 30 years.
Right.
But when he was at the University of Chicago, a picture that people might see from time to time was Milton Friedman walking with George Stigler. Partly it was because the contrast. Milton Friedman was probably about 5'2", and Stigler was about 6'3" or something. So you see this really short guy walking with this tall guy, and but they were very close. Stigler had his emphasis, which was not in macro, or as we said at Chicago, not in money, but in price theory. And fundamentally, a lot of people don't realize this because Milton was known so much for his work in the area of money or macroeconomic activity. But he had written a book called Price Theory of Provisional Texts. So Milton Friedman at heart was a price theorist. And I hope we're not getting too down in the weeds here, but it's for people who are out there and who are not, are not fanatics of fans of economics. People say it's a dismal science, but it really isn't. It's a very stimulating science. And the basics of price theory are the basics of what makes the economy go around in this country. It's the basics of a free enterprise system. I mean, a lot of people know, they've heard the name Adam Smith, but in a free market system, the nice thing about it in that paradigm is individuals go around and they try to do what's good for themselves. And the invisible hand, there's an invisible hand, as Adam Smith would say, that leads people to make decisions that are beneficial to others, as if there were a hand guiding them, but it's not really there. It's just that incentive. They're looking to make a profit. The better, in most cases, the better they are at serving people, the better they are at making a profit. People's wants and demands and desires are met, and it all comes together without a central planner.
Right.
So that's the key thing, right? Without a central planner, the free market does the planning. If you go to the old Soviet Union before it fell apart, there was a central planner. If you go to China now, there still is a central planner. You go to any authoritarian, totalitarian, communist, socialist regime, there are these authoritarian central planners. In free markets, the market is the planner. Did I get that right?
You sure did. One of the things that Milton Friedman used in his Free to Choose documentary was the parable that had been written up by another fan of ours named Leonard Reed about, it was called I Pencil. And Friedman made the point that no one in the world knows how to make a pencil. When you think about the division of labor that takes place to get the wood, to get the rubber, and to paint it and to process it and to compress the graphite, that relies upon this incredible network of people that are strangers, that may be enemies to one another if they met themselves if they met each other in the streets, but they all contributed to create this product that you can purchase for next to nothing, and relied upon this incredible cooperation that was driven by market incentives, not by the dictates of any central planner, as you say.
But, I mean, how do you tie that to reality? All right, so we have that theory, which you're talking about. We're talking about making pencils. And somebody's sitting there in the audience and they say, well, what gives, Jeff? I mean, what are you and Brad really talking about? Because we're talking in the United States. They're taping this show on May 15th, 2015. And you know, about
2012.
Yeah, May 15, 2012, not 2015. Thanks for the correction. Yeah. But about 3.5 years ago, a man by the name of Barack Obama was elected. And he was elected in a contest where he was facing John McCain. And the country, the United States, had just come off of, well, we're still in, was in a recession, was in a debacle, where people say the free market went awry. Even some free market people say that. And they say, so how can you rely on the free market? Because they would say, Brad Lips, didn't the free market, the absence of regulation, cause the debacle in the United States that then spread to the rest of the world and caused massive unemployment and massive distress? And they would say, as indeed our president, Barack Obama, has said, we can't go back to that kind of thing. That's what Mitt Romney and the Republicans want to do. So parse that a little bit and tell me, back in 2008, were we in a debacle caused by the free market?
Yeah, I think it's funny to look back at the Bush era as one of being a libertarian paradise. We're talking about an economy that was heavily regulated. Bush was not successful in implementing many free market reforms beyond his success with tax rates.
Tax rates. So he was known. George W. Bush was known for cutting tax rates, which is an important distinction, not just taxes. Cut marginal tax rates in 2001 and 2003 across the board, right? Which supply-siders would say gave people a greater incentive to save, work, and invest, and to come out of the recession which we were in at that time, or which we approached at the end of the Clinton administration. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
We were at the end of that administration. The country was going toward a recession. They were in a recession by the time Bush was elected.
Bubble bust. Yeah.
Right, the dot-com, whatever. We can talk about that. Bush comes in and says it's important to cut taxes across the board. Does that in 2001. Does that in 2003. The economy does recover. I would say it was a more robust recovery from that recession than the one that Obama had in 2008. Now, Obama agreed to keep those tax cuts in place, but he didn't come up with any new tax cuts.
Right, and I think that the things that have changed, like one, like going back to your question about what happened in 2007,
yeah,
2008.
what happened in 2008?
I mean, I think that we paid the price for some perverse incentives that were unleashed by Freddie and Fannie, where we have
which are quasi-government entities, private public entities, right?
Right. We sort of had socialism for failure.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right?
Right. So you're
And dominated administration. Those entities were run in large part by Democrats. Rahm Emanuel is now mayor of the city of Chicago, was involved in that for a while. Erskine Bowles was involved in that for a while. These are big name Democrats, right?
right.
So would Mr. Bowles and Rahm Emanuel like to step up and say they're at fault? Going back to Friedman, was the problem the people, Bowles and Emanuel and other Democrats, or was the problem that these institutions were set up in properly wrong incentives?
Yeah, I think that we have examples of government creating perverse incentives in the free economy so that people are making poor decisions and we're having
What were
capital.
those perverse incentives?
That the dream to make everyone a homeowner is not a realistic dream when you have people that have not saved for a home. And
They
that
don't have
you're
the appropriate
encouraging
wealth
people.
for that. They may not have the appropriate lifestyle, appropriate responsibilities. But somebody in the wisdom in government decided everybody should be a homeowner. You can't make it too easy for them, so let's make it easy. Let's have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac go out there and spread the word and give and buy up a lot of mortgages, even though they shouldn't have been issued in the first place. Let people know who are issuing mortgages that don't worry, issue the mortgage and we'll take over the risk right after. So if you've and then tell the entities, the financial institutions, you could package all these. You could securitize, as they say, all of these mortgages, which were really pretty bad mortgages. And so somebody will securitize them, they'll put it in the security. People who are buying securities think that these things are rated okay because the rating agency said they're okay. And this whole this whole debacle was created. And was it greed? Was it the greed of the people who were doing the packaging of the securities? Or was it Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the Congress setting up the wrong incentives to say everybody should be a homeowner, and so people who don't have sufficient income, give them the mortgage too? Who's to blame? Everybody? Would you say the government, the regulators, the free market? If you had to pin the blame on somebody, where would it go?
I mean, I think it's very difficult to say that there was an uptick of greed and that human nature changed during that era, and that's the cause.
You don't think that Bush brought it about? I mean, the Bush years of 2001 to 2008, yeah, the top 1%, he put all these people in there who were greedy. You don't think that really did it?
I don't think that was it. I think that we had perverse incentives and that there was going to be a
Because
bursting
we
of the
should
bubble.
say we're taping this in Skokie. We're about just 10 or 15 minutes away from Winnetka and in the Indian Hill area, the Indian Hill Country Club, where I think Mitt Romney is dining with some folks, probably at a cost of, I don't know, $5,000 a couple or more. So you weren't over there for dinner
I was
tonight.
not over there tonight.
But you could have been. But anyway, so
For
those.
$5,000, I guess. Yeah.
But these are the folks in Winnetka, in the North Shore, who are sort of a part of that government, part of the Bush administration. But you're saying they're not to blame. They didn't cause the debacle in 2008.
I think that both parties deserve some blame, but I think that what we're needing to make people more aware of is just the folly of creating excessive government intervention in the economy. And I think that the reason that we have not seen a rebound the way that we did, say, in the Reagan era when he entered office with similar problems to what Barack Obama faced, is that Ronald Reagan's approach.
We're carrying this bat, folks. We're going to explain to you, but actually try this. We'll just interrupt for a second. Just hold that bat.
Not really lefty, but yeah.
Yeah, because Brad Lips is going to illustrate that when you're holding a bat, as Tom Cruise said, in your hand, you can think better. So just keep talking while you're holding that bat, and
Okay,
you'll
we'll
see
see if I can keep my train of thought. Well, I think there's a clear contrast to be made between the policies that Ronald Reagan put in place when he entered office, which were all about trying to liberate the American workforce to make decisions on their own, to save and invest with the certainty the government was
That's
not
Ronald
going.
Reagan trying to do that?
That was exactly.
Yeah.
That was not trying to
And that's
second
what
guess
you've written
their-
about the Reagan vision, right?
I did, yes.
See if we can we'll show that.
Got that?
There we go.
All right.
Okay.
I think that's a nice contrast between
The Reagan
approach-
vision by Brad Lips and
Dan Lips,
Dan Lips.
Yes.
Dan would be.
my brother.
There you go. All right. So Reagan had that vision. Bush sort of had that vision, but maybe a little less so. A little too willing. One, to expand the role of government, and two, perhaps with cause, perhaps with not. In September 11, that changed everything. Changed his presidency. The Iraq War dominated so much, and obviously expanded spending expanded foreign spending. He did not cut back on domestic spending. Bush always said he wanted to play big ball. I would say he should have played hardball, not big. This hardball, Bush didn't realize this. Like, as a former owner of the Texas Rangers, where's he got hardball here? George, next time you're president, next time Bush is president, remember, this is hardball. We don't play big ball, we play hardball. And if you play hardball right, as Chris Matthews does, you keep focused on the issues, stay focused on smaller government. If Bush had done that, in fact, maybe if he'd, slight digression, but it just show how all of this applies. Because Milton Friedman, was against the war in Iraq. And people would find that surprising. They say he's a conservative. No, because he was a consistent, thoughtful conservative. And he simply looked at that and said it was an act of aggression. The United States was the aggressor. A lot of people would be surprised about that. But just think about it. In a sense, Barack Obama says, you got somebody like Al-Qaeda, that's a problem. It's a law enforcement issue, essentially. Go after Al-Qaeda. Barack Obama, to the dismay of many liberals, has expanded the drone program tremendously. I mean, he's really focused on Al-Qaeda, and he really wants to use drones because you can go and pinpoint at that. And I think, in a sense, Milton Friedman would have been cheering him on, because that was, in a sense, and is so much more efficient than taking out a whole country, and all of that it caused. And Bush said, he wanted to be humble before September 11th. He wanted to not be involved in, what's the word? When you go around the world?
Nation building.
Nation building. Bush said no nation building, and he got caught up. So a slight digression, but again, Milton Friedman focusing on the principles of demand and supply, of individuals making decisions, doing what's best for them. Was the United States too audacious to think we can go into Iraq, maybe with good motives, and say, dump Hussein, make it better for us, maybe make it better for the economies of the world in terms of oil, but also you have a democracy there, you have allies. But can you really change things? I think Milton Friedman would counsel him and say, you may be taking on too much. Had we not done that, the economy might have been stronger, the debacle of 2008 might not have happened had George W. Bush been thinking and saying, we should stop this trend of trying to push everybody into housing. Stop trying to play big ball, as he'd say. No, learn how to play hardball. Hardball is a very focused sport. You get the ball over the plate, you hit this ball with the fat end of the bat. If you hit the ball in the middle part of the bat, it doesn't go so well. That's what Bush was doing. He was swinging the bat, and he wasn't trying to hit it here. I think we've really, holding that bat, it really helps. You see, right there. But so a lot of people, they just don't understand this. The real problem was Bush, in a sense. And because Bush was not doing what you're talking about, you're going around the world, and you're trying to bring people to their think tanks to spread the gospel, the word of the free market. You do that, you've done it in Latin America?
Right.
You've done it in the Middle East? Did you do that in Iraq? Is that going on now? Iraq, Afghanistan?
We do have a partner in Iraq.
You have somebody in Afghanistan?
Right.
These are the nascent countries with nascent governments that are growing up. These are, and you would agree, we were saying just before the show, you would agree with Rahm Emanuel, and maybe Milton Friedman would agree, that in times of crisis, it's also a time of opportunity. Never waste a crisis, said Rahm Emanuel. But he wanted to expand government. Milton Friedman wanted to have those crisis opportunities to use to expand the role of the free market, to contract government.
Right. I think that.
So here you got Milton Friedman on the right trying to reduce the role of government, use the crisis to push up the free market, and you got Rahm Emanuel on the left trying to use the role of government, to expand student loans, to expand various programs for low-income people, to expand the role of the government, okay?
Yeah, I'll make one distinction, though. I'll say that when Rahm Emanuel brought up the never let a crisis go to waste quote, I think that was a rather cynical way to look at the crisis that we were experiencing in the U.S., and he was talking about it as a way to sort of mobilize a left-of-center agenda on a number of topics, when I think that what Americans really wanted was a focus on repairing a troubled economy. The quote, when Friedman brought up this observation that policy change tends to happen during a real or perceived crisis, he was making the point that we just have to be patient, that there's a lot of us that have been working at this a long time trying to advance free market ideas, and he was just counseling, you're not going to necessarily capture people's attention unless there's one of those moments of opportunity when they're looking for alternatives.
As he would say in Chile, they were looking for other alternatives. He would say the Chile boys who had been trained at the University of Chicago in free market economics had gone back to Chile, had become finance ministers. That was an opportunity then to install the free market, to privatize Social Security. As far as I know, it's worked there, right?
Right.
So, but getting back to what you're doing here, okay,
Yes.
so I want to focus on that. I mean, you're in 80 countries. You're looking for intellectual entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, that's what we
does that
call
mean?
the local leaders who are going to be able to attract resources and convey the ideas, the way that think tanks do here in the U.S.
Give me an
One
example.
thing that
Can you name an intellectual entrepreneur in a country, in a city?
I mean, you just mentioned in Afghanistan, we have a very admirable individual named Mohammad Ramzipour, and he's a law professor, and he's developed something called the Afghanistan Legal and Economic Studies Organization. And he's an example of someone that wants to have a lasting impact on his society by teaching people free market ideas. We think that it would be absolute folly for us to go into Afghanistan and send me to start up a think tank there. We really wait for the initiative to come from people.
He can start a think tank.
He can start a think tank because he has local
And
credibility.
he can get more people, and even the government may support it, and that would be okay with you if the government did. But you would most like to have private firms, private entities supporting him, right?
Yeah, well, we're actually very skeptical about think tanks that get close to government because the funding tends to compromise their independence.
So in order for them to continue to get funding, they have to say things the government wants said.
Exactly. So
So
really
the Heartland
advocate-
Institute here in Chicago probably doesn't get a lot of private funding. The Illinois Policy Institute doesn't
public funding,
doesn't get
right.
a lot of public or government funding.
Right.
Heartland is probably almost completely, if not completely,
think
funded
completely.
by private individuals,
Right.
private entities, not the government. The Illinois Policy Institute, the same thing, right?
Correct.
I wonder, like the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, which is on the left with Ralph Mortieri, and I know has a lot of union influence. I guess Ralph would say unions are private, right? That's not compromising him, right? Does he get government funding? I don't know. We'd have to ask Ralph. Ralph, come on over and we'll talk about it, okay? But so that's your point. You want to be pure in that sense, stay away from being on the government dole, so to speak.
Right.
Okay. So you have these free enterprise centers. What do they do?
Right. So one innovation to our work in recent years is that we've been utilizing some of the more established think tanks in this network that connects more than 400 think tanks in 82 countries, as you've said. Some of the more established groups are now working hand in hand with us to find and train new intellectual entrepreneurs so that in India, we just don't have one think tank. We're going to have student groups at universities all across the country.
That are networked and communicating with each other.
Right, that are working collaboratively, the same way that groups here are part of sort of the Right of Center Coalition and are friendly to one another as Heartland and Illinois Policy Institute are. So we want to see sort of a multiplicity of organizations, and we're finding it more
cost-effective. Let me take that bat out of your hand, just I don't want to burden you, but you look pretty comfortable. See, it really did help.
I like that.
It did help.
Yeah,
on that.
maybe I should do next time. Yeah.
So, like, how much time do we have left, Jay? What'd you say, about 10 minutes? Yeah. They're giving me a signal. Steph's helping out here.
Yeah.
A new Steph. Stephanie's helping out with about 8 minutes, she's saying, okay? All right, so if you keep that bat in your hand, it's hard to go wrong. Templeton Freedom Awards. Templeton sounds very familiar. It's a financial entity, something like that?
Indeed. So Sir John Templeton, you may remember from Wall Street Week back in the day, one of the great pioneers in international investing.
Was he on Wall Street Week in Review a lot?
He was, yeah,
Okay.
Louis Rukeyser and all that.
Right.
So
Louis Rukeyser.
yeah, I always like that Sir John made his money by investing internationally when no one else was looking for opportunities there. And in his philanthropy, he also sort of a trailblazer. And one of the things that he came to us for is looking for ways to influence the international environment in terms of trying to alleviate poverty. And he always said it's better to find ways to prevent future poverty than to just look at the symptoms.
You have a
of current
freedom
poverty.
dinner, you have freedom on the road, you got freedom schools.
A lot of
You know,
freedom.
a lot of
with an
freedom.
emphasis.
It's freedom and liberty. And that's our signal here. We're very subtle here. They give me a signal. There's about 5 minutes left.
Gotcha.
So you're about freedom. You're about liberty. Same with John Tillman at the Illinois Policy Institute. Same with Joe Bast at the Heartland Institute.
Yep.
Same with D. Roy Murdoch, right? We've seen talk about the
with us.
2%. He basically defended the notion that, the top 1% do a lot of good. They pay a lot of taxes. Contrary to what people say, the top 1% pay something like 33% of the total taxes, right? They do pay higher tax rates. It's not true that as your income goes up, This is basically a lie that's been perpetuated. So you should get in touch with D. Roy Murdoch, who knows this a lot better than I do. But so you're out there spreading the gospel. You're out there supporting these think tanks around the world, cultivating, nourishing them. And so at the end of the day, we've got Rahm Emanuel here, and we've got Milton Friedman. I mean, and I don't want to set up, because, Rahm sat in that chair before, as did Barack Obama, as did a bunch of great people. So I don't look at the world that there's people on the left and right, and one's evil and one not. No, they all should be challenged, and that's my job. I should challenge you, and I've tried to challenge you a little bit, and maybe should have challenged you more, because, Rahm Emanuel looks there and he says there are problems. He's mayor of the city of Chicago. He's got to solve the problems. I'm not sure he really looks at it and say, he's a leftist, he's trying to perpetuate a leftist agenda. No, he's trying to think of, how do I solve problems? He's got a problem that has a lot of low-income people who are in schools that are not educating them. Right. He ran on 3 things, Rahm did. And all the media who are slobbering applause, and I say that because they are. It's been a year, and most of the media just cannot say enough great things about Rahm. Now, I would just ask, he says there are 3 things he had to do. He wanted to improve the safety. He wanted to improve in the streets. He wanted to improve the schools. He wanted to improve the fiscal situation. I would just ask, after a year, is there one more charter school here due to Rahm Emanuel, and are those charter schools effective? Is there any school voucher, school choice due to Rahm Emanuel? I don't know. Are there more police? They're redeployed. Are the streets safer? I mean, that's how we should judge people, not whether they're left or right. God bless them. If Rahm performs and the educational quality improves and the streets are safer and the city is better fiscally, I'd say he's done a good job, left or right. You agree?
Yeah. And,
what's your impression of D.C.? I mean, do you have any impression on him? Do you know if he started any charter schools here? People talk about
Emanuel?
Yeah. I mean, his
I'm
buddy
not aware
in
of
D.C.,
it.
but you're in D.C. Arnie Duncan and Barack Obama single-handedly abolished a major school program opportunity for kids in D.C., school voucher, school choice. Kids who were in failing schools were now in private schools that are performing. They were doing well. And Barack Obama and Arnie Duncan saw to it that stopped. Am I right?
You're right. And I think that's one of the true crimes. Is that, when you think about the educations that he's able to afford for his daughters, and to deny that opportunity for low-income DC
right,
residents
so he
who are
spends about
enjoying it.
$30,000 each at Sidwell's Friends for his daughters, and he doesn't want kids to have $7,500 coming from private entities, right? Essentially. Oh, no.
Well, that was publicly funded.
That was
the
publicly
DC,
funded.
yeah.
So they shouldn't have $7,500 to go to the school of their choice. It's indefensible. I wish Barack would come out here and try to defend it, because he sat in this chair in 2004 and said, well, he said in 2002 he would do anything, including school vouchers, to make it better for the kids of Chicago. So we very much want to thank you, Brad Lips, for all the work that you've been doing, for coming here.
Thanks much, Jeff.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll. We hope you'll come back. But I think people have gotten a sense of what Milton Friedman was like, and what your group is about Milton Friedman.
Right, we're trying to spread those ideas that he advocated and get them championed locally, all over the world, all over this country, because we know that we have a lot of discussion to be had to move public policy.
What's the essence
in the
of
right direction.
Milton Friedman, as you see it?
Trusting the individual to have the freedom to choose, as he so wisely put it.
And we always give these books out, which we get from the Heartland Institute. Hold that up, Milton Friedman, Capitalism and Freedom. See?
Fantastic.
We would give it to you, but you've already had one, but you can get another one.
Thanks
How's that?
so much. Appreciate it.
And what is Friedman von Hayek known for? These are the 2 champions, if you will, of the Atlas Economic Research Foundation, Friedman and von Hayek, right?
Certainly 2 of our heroes, and I'll just mention that the title of Hayek's last book was called The Fatal Conceit, and he looked at the hubris of Washington, D.C. decision makers and others in government who believe they could make better decisions than you and I can.